Hi, I'm Steve, and I make everything, and welcome back to the shop. Quite a few people over the last few months have sent me email or posted comments in the channel around, what is the best laser, or, what should I buy? What can I buy for $1,000? What can I buy for $10,000? So I thought it would be good to address what you really need to know, things to consider when you're buying your first laser. So if you've never bought a laser before, what do you actually need to know? And you can do endless hours of research and come up with just as many questions as you have now. To be clear, there is no right answer, but there's no real wrong answer either, as long as you know what you're getting into. So what I thought we'd do is get going on really kind of a few things to consider, and maybe later in the video we can kind of talk about some of the choices I would have if I was buying a laser today for my first one. So with that, let's get going. I want to start by assuming a few assumptions. Generally, this is your first laser. Maybe you've had something smaller before and now you're buying kind of your first real laser or first production kind of laser. So you understand the laser. You understand, to some degree what the market looks like, maybe some of the brand names, you've looked at a few of those or talked to a few people. I certainly, when I was upgrading my laser to my Muse 3D, I talked to many people about lasers. And even then you go, well, did I make the right choice or not? There's always questions in your mind. We'll talk about some of those things based on some of these assumptions. If you're an expert already, this is probably not the video for you. By all means, keep watching if you're interested. Maybe you are thinking of upgrading, for example. So with that, let's get into it here. So since I like things clustered in groups of 3, I thought it would be good to kind of keep that theme throughout this video. So this video will include 3 sections. We'll start with requirements, then we'll look at some of the features that you might be interested in, and then I can show you some lasers in the third section. So in this first section, when we talk about requirements, there's really, again, 3 things that we want to look at here. The first one is by far the most important, and it's budget. What cost are you willing to pay for a laser? Now understand, lasers for home use or small business use can be anywhere from a couple of $100s to $20,000 or $25,000. And if you're at the top end, good for you. If you're at the bottom end, don't feel like you're making compromises. Look at it as a starting point. But what I did here was break the budget into clusters, into 3 groups. And the first one is the under $1,000 budget. The second one is that $1,000 to $6,000 range. And then the over $6,000 range, which seems to be where that boundary is, where you move from high-end consumer to semi-pro or professional kind of lasers. We'll talk about all lasers in that context, and when I talk about these, think of it as the low end of the market, the middle of the market, and the high end of the market. And that's the price ranges we're talking about here. The next thing we want to talk about as far as requirements is the purpose. Do you understand what you want to use your laser for? Is it primarily engraving on wood, or do you want to get into like full force cutting of metals? So as long as you understand, is this for a hobby where you just want to say, hey, I want to make a few keychains, or I want to do something simple for me. I'm not going to sell it, or I'll give it away a few bits and pieces to friends. That's the hobby laser segment. If you plan on either augmenting or starting a business with a laser, then you want a different class of laser, and these are kind of that business end of the laser market. And not surprisingly, those ones tend to lean to the higher end of the price range, but there's reasons for that. At the low end, they're small jobs. They tend to be much smaller lasers. At the high end, it's high volume, continuous operation, and reliability is definitely kind of built in for that price. So understand that purpose as well. Now, the third thing we'll talk about here in this triangle, and these things are all linked, is the list of materials. This is kind of important because if you're leaning towards cutting, say, balsa wood or veneer, or doing some basic engraving on cork, or maybe some engraving on cloth, you don't need to spend $25,000 to do that. Low-end market lasers, the blue lasers, you've probably seen lots of them on eBay and Amazon. Those lasers are fine for that kind of application. Now, if you do want to, say, cut or, well, not necessarily engrave, because you can even do engraving on plywood with a low-end laser. But if you want to start cutting things, then you're starting to look at the middle tier of the market. Now, they tend to be more powerful. They tend to be CO2 lasers, and they're good for things like plywood, acrylic, engraving on metal, as long as you have some kind of coating on it, ceramic, corian, any kind of composite material. So that's typically the medium part of the market. Now, if you decide, what you want to do is cut metal, then you're kind of looking at the high end of the market. And those are typically things like if you want to cut stone, you can engrave stone with a basic CO2 laser, but to cut stone, you're going to need a high-end laser. And they tend to be much higher power. They tend to use different technology and some of the harder composites as well. So that's typically the high end of the market. Now, that's kind of the first section. So if you understand those things, you kind of get a profile for the requirements that you have. The next thing we want to talk about is features. The first thing we want to talk about in features is the type of laser you want. And at the kind of in the first tier of the types is the LED type lasers. And these are the blue ones. They tend to be small, cheap, and not always very powerful. You can get up to maybe 3 or 4 watts, sometimes 5 watts with these. And if you don't understand the power, it's not really that critical whether you understand what light watts are. The bigger the number, the more you can cut, or the faster you can cut, or the deeper you can cut. So these small lasers, these LED type lasers, they're good for mostly engraving. You can cut basic things, again, balsa wood or veneer, something thin, paper, but they're not all that good for cutting thicker materials. They will do it. You can kind of brute force your way through it, but you'll always end up with some kind of scoring because you're really pushing the laser. The next laser type is the CO2 lasers, and these are by far becoming the more common in the middle part of the market. Think things like Glowforge, the maker blocks, laser box. I mean, there's tons of these things. The K40s, they're all CO2 lasers. And they're good for, again, cutting, mostly the heavier materials, but materials that you can conceivably cut. So wood, acrylic, not metals. And then the final type of laser that you can get, within the realm of the small business, maybe a high-end home laser is a fiber laser. Now, fiber lasers are always much more expensive than a CO2 laser would be. The advantage of them is they're super fast. So if you really want to cut things quickly, or engrave rather, they will do it in seconds, honestly. Much, much faster than a CO2 laser. And they do a very good job. They tend to be very high resolution. Instead of trying to steer a heavy laser head around, they tend to use galvos. Galvos are like servos. They can kind of move the mirrors around. So you don't really have to move anything but a tiny mirror. And that means you can go really quickly. The downside is the footprint of these of fiber lasers tends to be smaller unless you have a big budget. FSL has a series of fiber lasers. They're not cheap. They're $10,000, $15,000 depending on how they're configured. But the footprint of them, inside the box, you can cut like a 4x4 inch piece of tile or whatever. Now you can drop the bottom out and lift it up and get up to usually about a foot square. But to go much bigger than that, you need to add a lot of money to the price. So keep that in mind. The next thing to consider around features is the workspace size. And this is arguably a requirement as well. But if you understand what you use your laser for, then the workspace sizing kind of comes to an understanding. It comes to some clarity. So if you want to cut huge signs, an 8 by 10 inch K40 laser, that's $300. It's good. It is capable of doing that, but it's not good at doing that. So there's two things to consider with the workspace. The overall kind of XY dimensions. So most of the standard kind of home lasers tend to be in the 12 by 24 inch range. Some are slightly bigger. A lot of them are smaller. But the other thing to consider is also the height of a job that you can engrave on. So if you look at something like a Glowforge, the maximum realistic height with the crumb tray in is about 1.5 inches. You can maybe push it to 2 if you pull the crumb tray out. Similar for the Muse 3D, but some lasers like the Muse, you can put a riser box on it and drop the bottom out, and you can change lenses. So you can go to a 5-inch lens, and that will allow you to cut much taller items. So again, you have to kind of look at not only what you need a laser to do today, but what you think you might want to have a laser do tomorrow. Sometimes you have to be careful, right? So if you said, well, I bought a Glowforge because I'm only ever going to cut 1/8-inch plywood, but then somebody comes along and says, gee, I've got a 3-inch thick cutting board. Well, you're out of luck. You can't cut it or engrave on it. So keep that in mind. Think about the future before you spend, upwards of $5,000, $6,000. So the last thing you want to kind of consider with features is aftermarket accessories. So after you buy your original laser, can you expand it? And the most popular things, I mentioned lenses. So if you have a laser where you can kind of adjust the height, you can put a longer focal length lens in that lets you work with taller items. So can you replace the lenses in your laser? So if you look at a Glowforge, no is the answer. If you look at a K40, the answer might be maybe. If you look at a Muse or an Epilogue or anything else, a Trotec, like some of the higher end lasers, they all allow this kind of thing. So that one's important. Probably less important though than something like a rotary tool. And I did a video, I can put a link up here, on engraving water bottles. Well, water bottles are round, and to work on them, you need a rotary tool. And basically what that does is disables the Y-axis that you normally have on your laser, and you plug your rotary tool in, and it effectively wraps the Y-axis around something like a water bottle. So if you buy a laser where that is not an option, and you later decide, you're going to be very unhappy, because if you have something, again, like a Glowforge, for example, the answer is no. Some do, some come with a rotary tool. So you can buy like a $500 K40 laser and it will come with a rotary tool. Most of the high-end ones will also all support this. So keep those accessories in mind. So that's kind of it. Those are the things you really want to consider. Again, on the requirement side, price, purpose, materials, and on the feature side, the type of laser you want, the workspace size, and any accessories. Sounds simple, right? It's not. The downside of the laser business is there are hundreds of lasers out there, from the low end to the high end. So do some research, ask people, watch lots of videos. YouTube is full of videos for every type of laser you could imagine. And certainly ask people, right? If you want to know anything about a Muse 3D, you can ask me. If you want to know about a Glowforge, I am not your person. So, find a Glowforge user. If you want to know about, if you have a big budget and you say, hey, I want to spend $15,000 on an Epilogue, I would say go find an Epilogue user first. And go talk to them and say, hey, tell me what you can do for $15,000 that I can't do for $500. So with that, we'll kind of call the preamble here, the requirements and the features done. And now what I'll do is I'll spend a bit of time to make some recommendations. Now, understand, some of these lasers I have not seen before. A lot of them I have, but and certainly I've done research as I was buying my Muse 3D a few months ago. When I upgraded, I did a lot of research, so I had some good insight on some of these. Again, it's not an endorsement of any of these. Some of them it's based on firsthand experience, some of them it's based on people I talk to, and some of it is just honestly based on popularity on the web, right? On YouTube or if you go to, there's tons of laser forums online as well. So keep that in mind. But at the same time, I'll make these recommendations. Consider them when you're making your choice, but don't assume that there's any kind of endorsement or gospel fact here, because it's really just my sense of what a good laser is for some price range. And we'll break these down into, again, that low end of the market, the middle market, and the high end of the market. Okay, so now we come to the third part of this video, the recommendation section. And what I did was find a couple, 2 or 3 lasers in each of the low, medium, and high ranges of the market, just to kind of give you an idea. Some of these lasers I've actually used, some I've owned, some I've certainly done lots of research on my own as I was upgrading my laser recently. So these aren't endorsements in any way, but take this information as a starting point if it's useful to you. So let's get going on this. So looking at the low end of the market, as I mentioned, I picked out 3 lasers, and I'll put certainly a photo or a video if I can find one up here, as well as the specs for these lasers. But on the low end of the market, I picked 3, and some of these you may recognize if you've been already doing a bit of shopping. Number 1 on this list in the under $1,000 market is the Ortur Laser Master 2. You'll see these all over the place in Amazon and eBay, and specs are up there. You can see it's a diode, solid state diode laser, so it's blue, 455 nanometers. These ones are actually available at up to 20 watts, which is pretty impressive. And most importantly, the price of these, you can get these well under $500. Depending on the power you want, you can get them under $400. So if you're just starting out, it may not be a bad option to look at. They're a good starter laser because blue lasers are much better for engraving than cutting. They will cut, but they're not as clean a cut as say a CO2 laser or certainly a fiber laser. So keep that in mind. Anyway, the Ortur Laser Master 2 is, it would be my pick, honestly, in the low end of the market. Next on this list is the Orion Motor Tech, or OM Tech. You'll see them listed, the 40-watt CO2 laser. Now, this is the lowest price CO2 laser you can find. They're roughly $500. Now, the downside is they're only 40 watts, expected 40 watts. In reality, they're probably 30 watts. But you can, for a lot of these, you can get things like the rotary attachment, and they're honestly great lasers for the price. Now, they aren't really turnkey, so you do have to be a bit of a tinkerer / engineer to kind of work on some of the early problems you'll have with these, just minor things. But once you have them up and running, they're pretty solid. Last on this list is actually one that's a Kickstarter project. But it is starting to make some noise, is the Laser Pecker 2. Now, I hate the name, I think it's ridiculous, but the laser itself actually has some really nice features for the money. It's a diode laser. This one's only 5 watts, but it does what it says it's going to do, which is mostly engrave. And it's about $600, so it's a little more on the high end of this price range. But for that, you get something that's truly a small laser. It's really tiny. It's also portable. You can run it on batteries. It'll run for, their site says 200 minutes on batteries. Whether that's true or not, if you buy one, let me know. Now, what's interesting about these lasers, even though they're solid state, to steer the beam around to do the cutting, they don't move a big laser head like you would in a CO2 laser. They use galvos, which is more like a fiber laser. So a galvo is like a servo that you can move around on 2 or 3 axes, depending on how they're configured. And they steer the laser that way. Now what that gives you is speed. These things are fast, but of course you can see the footprint is pretty tiny. Now they will do long, skinny things, so you can go up to, in this case, 2,000 millimeters, which is, 8 inches or 6 inches, somewhere in there, 6-7 inches, about 100 meters wide, which is 3 inches, 3.5 inches. So you're not gonna cut out your address numbers for your house on these things. It's just not what they're good for. But if you want to engrave things, yeah, these are pretty awesome lasers. So take a look at that. Okay, so now we're moving into the middle of the market, and these are lasers in the $1,000 to $6,000 range. Now, to be fair, the 3 I picked are just 3 good lasers. There are hundreds of lasers in this space, so don't assume these are the end all. Number 1 on the list is the Boss 1416. Now this laser it's interesting. It's almost an industrial laser. It's big, it's heavy, weighs a couple of 100 pounds, comes on a metal frame with wheels. It's under $5,000. Nicely configured, it's under $5,000. So keep that in mind. The default configuration is 50 watts, and you can upgrade these to 70. So you can get good power out of these things for even the 70 watt one will still be under $6,000 by far. Now, the bed size on these is kind of weird. It's 14 by 16 inches, hence the model number 1416. For the price, it's hard to kind of argue about the footprint size on the workspace, because they are just good solid lasers, and by all accounts the company supports them well, so take a look at them. Number 2 on this list is the MakeBlock laser box, and you'll probably see some of these advertised either online, or there's certainly lots of YouTube videos of people reviewing them. I'd be happy to review one if they sent one to me. They're CO2 lasers. Most of these lasers now, for the rest of this list, are CO2 lasers. And this particular one, again, it has a kind of a strange workspace dimension. It's 12 by 19 and a half inches, which means if you're buying standard material, it normally comes as 12 by 24, sometimes 12 by 20. So those things won't fit by default on this bed. So you may have to cut a piece off of your material before you can lay it down in the bed. For the most part, it's a Chinese laser, but they're trying to compete with the Glowforge market, and they certainly compete on price. This thing is roughly the Glowforge Pro Plus. You can put rotary on these, and it's still $4,700. So by comparison, the comparable Glowforge would be almost $6,000. A comparable FSL laser would be well over $6,000. So take a look at them. They're good if you're looking at what a Glowforge can do, but you have kind of a tighter budget. They might be worth considering. Number 3 on this list, of course, is the venerable Glowforge. Again, it's a CO2 laser. It has a standard workspace size of 12 by 24 inches. The cut height, the maximum cut height, is 2 inches if you remove the crumb tray. By default, with the crumb tray in, it's about 1.5 inches. And if you get the Pro, there's 3 variants of this ranging from $3,000 to $6,000. The Pro is the high end. It has a 45 watt laser instead of a 40, and it has a pass-through, so you can put longer items in and work on them. So it's a nice laser. It's certainly popular. If you go to their site, you'll see there's a massive community around them, and it's pretty clear people love these things. So if you want something that's turnkey, this is probably the laser for you. You can take these things out of the box, get them up and running, and cut something within half an hour. And the software is really designed for people who are new to lasers. So not a lot of buttons to press, just basic functions. So, if I was in this market, I'd probably seriously look at a Glowforge in spite of some of its drawbacks. And if you want to see what those are, I did a video a while back on comparing the Glowforge and the Muse 3D and why I ended up with a Muse 3D. So that's the mid-market. So now we're looking at the high end of the market, and I picked 3 lasers here. Not surprisingly, the first one is the Muse 3D. They're CO2 lasers, 12 by 20 workspace, so they fit standard material, 2-inch engraving or cutting height. By default, you can expand it, and available in 40 or 45 watt configurations. Price around $6,500 to start. As far as other features, they come with an Intel 3D camera, which means you get autofocus. You've seen me use it in some other videos. They have a full color display touch panel on the top, so you can control the whole laser from there. You can also buy, as far as attachments, they have several lenses you can buy for different focal lengths. They sell a 6-inch riser box, so you can drop the bottom out of the laser like all FSL lasers and stack it on the riser, and that gives you up to 6 or 8 inches of height instead of 2. And once you have that, you can either cut taller items or you can drop the rotary attachment in there and cut round things. Rotary attachment and the riser are things that you just can't get on a laser like a Glowforge. And that's not a knock against Glowforge, because that's not the market they're after. But if you're like me and you have kind of a small business and you do things periodically that, honestly a Glowforge can't do, then this might be the laser you want. Next on the list is the Epilog Fusion Edge, and you may have seen these. They're also CO2 lasers. Either the bed, it comes in 2 configurations, 12 by 24 inch or 24 by 24 inch workspace. Power anywhere from 30 watts to 80 watts, depending on your budget. The downside is they're about $15,000 or more to start. So it's quite a leap from, say, a Muse up to there. But these lasers are kind of the industry standard for small business and well, even big business. So what you're getting is a truly industrial laser when you buy these things. You can get a rotary tool that with a 3-jaw chuck rather than a set of friction wheels like most of the rotary tools on the lower end machines. So very solid attachment when you're rotary cutting things. Standalone cooling, you don't have an external cooler like you do with a Muse. And of course it has a touchscreen. So that's the epilogue. If you've got the money, kudos, go buy one of these. Last on the list, and maybe I'll take flack for recommending another FSL laser, but the Muse Pandora laser. Now, unlike the others we've talked about here, this is a fiber laser. And fiber lasers, they tend to be a bit more expensive. The reason I picked this one is because it's one of the cheapest fiber lasers you can buy. Now, for that quote-unquote cheap price of $10,000 to $15,000, you get something that with a 4x4 inch workspace inside the box. That doesn't sound like much, but like all fused lasers, you can drop the bottom out and then expand that to 12x12 by lifting the laser up. So that's the setup there. Power goes from 20 to 50 watts depending on your budget. Of course, you can get multiple lenses for these. You can get a rotary tool for these. Now, these lasers, unlike some of the other lasers we looked at here, except for the laser pecker, it uses galvos rather than a bunch of mirrors. So it's really fast. It's probably 100 times faster than a typical CO2 laser for work. So if you're getting paid by the job in your business and you just want to hammer things out, this might be the perfect laser for you. So keep that in mind. Anyway, those are the laser choices I made in the low, medium, and high end. And go take a look at them. So that's it. We're buying our first laser. We looked at our requirements. We understand, some of the lasers that are available, the price ranges anywhere in the kind of under 1,000, 1 to 6,000 or above 6,000. Now, again, I talked about 9 lasers here that I would recommend if in any of these categories. Keep in mind, there are hundreds of lasers out there. And, if you're looking at other lasers, by all means, but keep in mind that they may or may not be popular. But don't be fooled. This is a different market than a lot of markets. Don't be fooled by the fact that everybody knows what a Glowforge is. Doesn't mean it's the best laser. You may have never heard of an epilogue laser before, but they are the best. They're also one of the most expensive. So take a look at that. Anyway, hopefully you got a bit out of this video. As always, I'll put a video over on the side. If you're looking for discounts on lasers or software, look in the description below. And with that, go buy a laser and go make your world, and I'll see you next time.